So it's now 16 past 6 Geneva time. Let's formally launch this event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, good evening to who is with us here at the International Conference Center in Geneva, and welcome to who is with us on WebEx or watching the video of the event. So we have many people who are connected with us on WebEx this evening. We have the pleasure to welcome you this evening for this side event to the 14th meeting of the open-ended working group of the Basel Convention on the control of transborder movements of hazardous waste and their disposal, organized by the Basel Action Network, Break Free from Plastic, the International Pollutants Elimination Network, known as IPEN, with the support of the Geneva Environment Network. More than 3 years after the plastic waste amendments to the Basel Convention enter into force, today's side event will present a snapshot of where the world is at in both exporting and importing countries, and examine the challenges in combating illegal waste trafficking and the enforcement of international law. Panelists will also delve into the loopholes in the amendments and present recommendations to uphold the original promise of the Basel Convention plastic waste amendments to protect human health and the environment from the adverse effects of hazardous plastic waste. Before I hand over the floor to Jim Puckett, who is the Executive Director of the Basel Action Network, for the introduction and the formal welcome, I would like to remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as the video of the event will be made available on the webpage of the event, and the link is being shared in the chat for who is online with us, or on the screen for who is in the room with us. And we keep repeating that at each event because it's one of the most popular questions in our chat. So throughout the event, those who are online can raise their questions by using the Q&A box. We will use your questions to feed the discussion after the presentations. So with that, Mr. Puckett, you have now the floor.
Thank you so much, Diane, and thank you to the Geneva Environmental Network. And thanks to all of you that have joined us online and in person here this evening. We're going to take you on a tour of kind of where we're at. We're going to kind of pull out a report card and see where we are after the plastic amendments 3 years later. And we will be a bit critical. I think it's important at this point to really be honest about where we are and what we need to improve. The agenda of today will be talking about the promise of the amendments. We're going to look at evidence from exporting countries with the numbers that we get from Comtrade data. And then we're going to go and look on the ground and get the anecdotal information from 2 global hotspots, Turkey and Malaysia. We're going to look at governance concerns, the situation in Southeast Asia, how governments there are organizing themselves to the challenge and whether that's working. And then we have a special guest, Mr. Norisham, here from Malaysia, who is going to speak about the government's perspective on dealing with illegal trafficking, etc. And then we're going to go into some of the plastic waste loopholes with the help of the International Pollutants Elimination Network Science Gang. We're going to wrap it up by asking the question, is plastic waste recycling really ESM? And then we'll have our conclusions and recommendations and hopefully a time for discussion. So this promise that we're talking about in the title of this event, we didn't ever write this promise down, but we were all really thrilled and pleased with the work we had done to create the first global governance to do anything about plastics. We knew we had a plastics crisis. There was talk of having a convention about plastics, which is now underway. But we were the first, Basel, to actually put something into international law, which was going to try to address the crisis that we were in. So that promise that we came away from that meeting in 2019, I kind of think we didn't write it down, but what we all believed was going to happen is that with stricter controls, plastic waste exports would be reduced globally, with the worst exports being eliminated. We believed that the 3 plastic waste listings would cover all plastic waste. We believed the Basel parties would diligently enforce the new rules. And we believed that the export of plastic waste would be confined to ESM operations. First, we're going to look at the numbers from Comtrade data. This is based on 3915, which is not all plastic waste, but it's a lot of the scrap, maybe half of the plastic waste that's generated is under the HS code 3915. So we can pull that off of Comtrade data and see what's happening around the world. The reason we would expect the exports and the trade to diminish is that for the first time, we were going to take plastic waste that not even hazardous, but we were going to scrutinize to make sure that they were in fact unmixed, single polymers, that they're uncontaminated, and that they were going to ESM facilities. That's the only way you could get out from under the controls of the convention with that listing B3011. All other shipments would require PIC and ESM assurances for the first time, and such requirements would eliminate, we thought, unsustainable exports, which we knew were happening. So we expect to see a big drop-off. But let's see what the global picture looks like. First, though, we want to look at who are the big exporters, the OECD countries that are exporting to the non-OECD world. You see that Japan here is the world champion by far. Unbelievable. Over, 1.5 billion kilos for the 3-year period that we're looking at here. And then it comes down to the US and Germany, Netherlands, UK, etc. The receivers, the world champion dumping ground, I'm afraid, is Malaysia. And it's great that we have them represented here today. Then followed by Vietnam, Turkey, and Indonesia, and so on. We're going to be looking a lot at that divide between 2020 and 2021 when the amendments went into force. So that's what that red line there is all about. And these arrows give you the general direction of the trend. Well, it did come down, came down a bit, but then it's just leveled off. With respect to Turkey, it came down quite a bit, but it leveled off. And we're still seeing levels higher than 2018 going to Turkey today. With respect to Indonesia, shockingly, the exports have increased. So they're higher than they were in 2020. With respect to Latin America, the same, a big jump upwards. And those have tapered a bit, but we're still higher than we were in 2020. So let's look at the EU. The EU has come down from 2020 to 2021, but it's coming back up again. Very worrying. These are the exports to non-OECD countries from the EU in those years. Turkey, again, has gone down, but as you'll see, we have some worrying information coming in, which we'll look at in a minute. This is to Malaysia from the EU. Again, it's rising precipitously in the last 3 years. Same with Indonesia, even more so in terms of the curve. In the UK, we're seeing exports on the rise, and they're now higher than they were in 2020, more. To Vietnam, a huge leap up. What's that all about from the UK? Turkey, again, coming down, but now coming back up from the UK. So one of the things that we're very concerned about is what's happened in the last recorded month. This is the average back in 2020 per month. This is the average of the last month, March of 2024, and we have more coming out of the UK. Japan, it's come down a bit, but remember, Japan is dealing with a huge scale of information of exports, massive quantities. So when they come down a bit, it's just a bit. And there we're seeing worrying signs as well of the trade starting to come up. This is to Malaysia here. And this is to Vietnam. Slight trend upward. Indonesia upward. And Philippines, we're really shocked to see this. It's really coming up in the Philippines from Japan. So again, looking at Japan's average in 2020 and what the most recent data says, it's about the same. So this is not progress, folks. So much of the trade is unsustainable, and these rules were supposed to slow it, delay it, stop it. We should see a big downward drift, but we're not seeing that. The USA, They did have a steady downward move there, which is laudable. But with India, it's coming up, and with Mexico really coming up. The Mexican situation, again, the average monthly in 2020, you see that. You see what it was in the last recorded data we were able to get in February 2024, a big rise. So in global, to look at the global summary here, the trade has reduced about 8% between now and 2020 overall. But recent increases in key countries, Turkey and Mexico, is very worrying. Some destinations like Indonesia and Latin America and Vietnam actually exceed pre-amendment levels. Japanese exports to their Asian neighbors have risen steadily since 2020, particularly to Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Since 2020, the Netherlands, which is kind of a turntable country, they take stuff in from the UK and from Europe, and it gets registered as Netherlands exports, has increased exports dramatically to non-OECD countries. So finally, the conclusion I draw from this is that the plastic amendments have not resulted in seriously reducing plastic waste exports as we had believed they would. So I'm going to pass the mic over now to my colleague, our researcher with BAN from Kuala Lumpur, who's been getting out there and really getting her hands dirty with what the situation looks like on the ground in Malaysia. Will you take it over?
Thank you, Jim. So it's very easy to look at figures that Jim presented and maybe the technicalities that my colleagues, my esteemed panelists will speak about later. It's easy to dehumanize it. So my presentation and the presentation after me, we will show you what's at stake, and we'll show you that these are real issues and real lives that are being affected. So when China banned waste imports, just quickly, let's look at China's geography and let's look at Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is now the top importer of plastic waste. China made a notification to the WTO and they said that they are banning waste imports because they cannot control the pollution. It's not because they wanted to move up the supply chain, the value chain or anything. It's because they could not control the pollution. So let's compare China and Southeast Asia. Look at the wealth, how much income per capita they have. Look at the political will of their government. We could look at the strength of the state. We can look at the geography. Look at Southeast Asia, it's surrounded by water. And look at the time frame. China imported plastic over the past 30 years. They imported 100 million metric tons. That plastic production is expected to increase exponentially. How much plastic waste is going to come to Southeast Asia? What does that mean for plastic pollution and marine debris? Yeah, and what does that mean for people's health? So here I will quickly bring you through the supply chain from transport to processing to disposal. The implications of this trade to Malaysia, it's a mixed bag of legal trade as reported in UN Comtrade data and also illegal trade. So what are the implications? Firstly, at the ports, we don't have access to ports, so we have to rely on media reports. There is a lot of illegal activity going on. This has taxed our enforcement agencies. It's challenging our system of governance. Yet, these are only the containers that get caught. How much dirty waste is misdeclared, yet managed to pass through undetected? And how did they go through? Was it just, was there any elements of corruption? Was there malfeasance? Or what? We don't know the answers to these. And that was back in 2018, 2019. Our ports were filled with plastic waste. Now we are finding e-waste or e-plastics. It's all still plastics. And in addition, there's all those toxic materials that come with electronic waste as well. And we managed to sneak in the private ports. So those previously, all those were stopped at major ports in Malaysia, Port Klang or the Penang port. This is a little tiny private port owned by this well-connected man. And this is how it looks like. the waste is clearly being imported, and it's just dumped there. We are not sure how this port is regulated. There's a customs office there, but we haven't managed to meet the customs officer. But what we know is that the port, a lot of structures at the port, a lot of warehouses, they're all illegal because the land status is agricultural land. And this port used to be a very beautiful place at the river mouth, and now it looks like this. Next, moving on, we'll go to recycling facilities. This plastic recycling facility has an import permit. It is bringing in plastic waste legally. We have guidelines by our solid waste department that says that your plastic waste must be stored properly. You must have good housekeeping. But this facility is clearly not adhering and not complying. You can see plastic waste, microplastic pollution is a nightmare. There's no way you can control it. And if you look at the bottom right image over there, oops, yeah, you can see other scraps. So what happens when you recycle plastic? Mechanical recycling is that you shred it, you melt it, and you pull it through an extruder, and then you cut it up into pellets. When you pull it through the extruder, there is a filter, and you cannot, people don't want dirty, contaminated materials because it'll make it bitter, and the pellets are just bad quality. So there's a lot of residual waste, there's a lot of throw out, and these are all plastic waste from wealthier countries that came to Malaysia, got processed, and now we have to deal with the residual waste. This is also, these are from two different recycling facilities. This is the wash water bath. In the middle photo, you can see that there's a pipe that leads to some drainage system. And then on the right, it's just a drain leading out of the premises of the recycling facility into the public drain. And it's just going to go unfiltered through the river. So microplastic again. And then there's the issue of fire. This facility also has an import permit and also has well-connected directors. On the left, you can see the plastic waste stockpiles in 2020. In the middle, it caught fire. Interestingly, only the stockpiles caught fire. The facility, the buildings were perfectly fine. And then in 2023, there you go. The waste is piled up again. So fires cause air pollution. No remedies for residents living around the facilities at all, and no explanation of why the fires happened. Was it? It wasn't the building. It was the stockpiles. There was no wiring there. How did it catch fire? There are allegations of people getting rid of stock that cannot be recycled, but it's all allegations. And now we go to facilities without permit. I only have one slide on this because in the interest of time, but with a lot of facilities without import permits who are also processing imported waste. So this facility, you can see the old stockpiles on the left all falling into the water canal. And there's a recent investigation by ABC. They put a tracker and Apple AirTag in the plastic waste in the US, and it came to this facility. So we know for sure that they are bringing in imported waste illegally. And not forgetting, aside from all that microplastic pollution and air pollution and water pollution, there's also the issue of toxic chemicals. But I won't speak so much on this. My colleague will talk more about this. And then moving on to disposal. So if people can evade the law and not comply at their facilities, what do you think they're going to do with the waste? In Malaysia, there's this saying that waste is wealth. When you trade your waste, you can get some money back, things like that. But that's absolutely wrong. Waste is a responsibility because at the end of the line, someone needs to pay for it. Residual waste from facilities, they need to pay tipping fees to landfills. In Malaysia, the only way for disposing waste is to landfill it. We have many, I think 15% is sanitary landfill, the rest are just open dumps. Of course, these people would not want to pay the tipping fee, and it's so easy to just dump the waste somewhere in the middle of an oil palm plantation where no one is looking. So on the left, you can see the waste back in 2019, and you can see that in 2024, a lot of the waste is still there. It's in fact, it's like embedded into the soil in some places. Who's going to clean up that microplastic? How are you going to clean it up? And then in 2022, we found that the nature of the illegal waste being dumped changed. We don't find food packaging from Norway, Japan, Germany anymore. We find shredded plastic bits. And back then it came in small piles. We didn't really know what they were, except that some of them were really smelly. You could see that they were processed with some form of solvent. And you can see on the first picture, that's actually an illegal former sand mining site. It's really deep and they just filled it full of rubbish. And it's beside a river that feeds millions of households for drinking water, potable water. Yeah, so the waste changed in nature after the Malaysian authorities cracked down. Now, after that small piles we saw initially, suddenly someone discovered there's a huge pile, a mountain of waste hidden deep inside oil palm estate under power lines, usually places where people wouldn't go. And this happened over COVID, where the landowner could not go and check his land. And you can see here it's affecting our food. There are banana trees there. It's affecting our water. There's water canals. There's cows there. There's a goat there. It's affecting our food, our water. And these piles of waste are constantly being burned, causing respiratory diseases to residents around the area. So this week, okay, last week I found food packaging, post-consumer packaging, and this time it's washed. I have a lot of samples here if anyone would like to come and see. It's washed, so we think that it's probably likely from waste paper facilities. The plastics come with the waste paper, and when they wash it, they extract the plastics and dump it and burn it. And then look, more from Japan, and what's that? Is that Greece? Greece. And of course, we have Italian waste, and it's like a treasure hunt, you know. And it's not just implications on our health and on our environment. It's affecting our enforcement, governance, trust in the government, between government and the people, trust among government agencies. There's criminality involved. Datuk is an honorific, is equivalent to Sir in UK. In powerful people, threatening vulnerable people. It's affecting the social fabric of our society. It's creating a lot of xenophobia. It's causing a lot of vulnerable, undocumented workers to be further oppressed. And we can't even, we are working very hard to improve our waste management in the country. We're trying. The imported plastic waste do not help. And then here we go, we have this study. We don't know how true it is, but it says that Malaysians eat the most plastic. I think from my photos before, we can see why we eat the most plastic. But strangely, Japan, the country that has the most plastic packaging and eats the most seafood and exports the most plastic waste, is not on the list. So we're wondering about their methodology, but it is still concerning that all the Southeast Asian countries are all eating plastic, and yet we are the top importer of plastic waste in the world. So these are questions that we need to keep asking, and we don't have answers to. What's coming, where they're going. We only see what we see on the ground. And last but not least, I have to say that every single time we do our site visits, we die a little inside, physically and figuratively and literally. We feel sick, and it really brings us down. But Malaysia is not all the photos that I showed you before. This is Malaysia, and this is at stake. Not just in Malaysia, but in Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, Mexico, Chile, Ecuador, everywhere that is processing imported plastics. Turkey would have seen the scenes that I showed you just now. And we actually look like this, not like that. So this is what's at stake. Thank you. And now I will pass the mic on to Dr. Sedat Gundogan from Çukurova University, Turkey.
Yeah, thanks, Pri, and thanks, Jim. Your presentation make my presentation easy. So I would like to show you the Turkish journey on the plastic waste import, because to understand and to get the whole picture, we should know that how things are evolved and how Turkey become the European largest dumping ground for plastic waste, and also third in the world. So here you can see, I don't know, yeah, it's good in the screen, but here in the my screen is so small. But I will try to explain how Turkey involved this situation, these businesses. As I remember, it started at 2016 when we started to investigate microplastic pollution in the Mediterranean coast. We found some specifically shredded plastics inside the marine surface water. Then we didn't know that at that time, we didn't know that Turkey imported plastic waste because it's meaningless. When we heard that, we said that why a country import plastic waste? Because we have enough plastic waste in our country, like 4 million tons per year. When we consider the municipal waste that we generate annually. During that time, we get in contact with some newspaper and international media organization to give interview about the plastic pollution in Turkey. And then we realized that those specifically shredded plastics comes from these recycling facilities, but we didn't have enough evidence when we investigate this microplastic pollution in the marine environment. Then we started to follow the path of this microplastics, and then we found that most of the recycling facilities located around the river, which is one of the most polluted river in the Mediterranean Sea, responsible top 3% of the total plastic pollution in the entire Mediterranean Sea. And then there is also another one close to this river. We call it Ceyhan River, which I'm talking about the Seyhan River. Seyhan and Ceyhan is kind of sister and brother rivers in the ancient time. So both river transports more plastic than any other countries and other rivers in other countries in the Mediterranean Sea. And then we found some illegal dumping grounds, specifically shredded microplastics, because all these microplastics, which my colleague Puyi also brings some example here, these facilities dumping this shredded plastics to alongside the canals and rivers, because the area that we are working and one of the main destination of this plastic waste is an agricultural plain. It's like a flat, and there are many canals, and the farmers using this canals water as irrigation water, and all this irrigation waters polluted by this recycling facilities, because none of the recycling facilities in Turkey has treatment facilities inside the recycling facilities. So they are discharging all this polluted by microplastic wastewater to the canals, and some of them involving this microplastic polluted water to the central wastewater stream. And then we found the first illegal dumping ground in September 2019 in Izmir city. It was full of Italian waste mixed with medical plastics, not only household waste. So it was totally forbidden. But I mean, in reality, there is no limit for such plastic, the import of such plastic waste. After that, we passed the legislative era for Turkish context. The government changed the legislation and applied a quota application. They reduced the quota from 100% to 80%, which has zero effect on the numbers. Even it increased the number of import. And then the BBC made a very effectful documentary news on British plastic waste dumped in Adana city. And then after that, first ban of mixed plastic waste came into agenda, but still this is just on paper, because you cannot control all the containers. You have to open all the containers and control one by one each piles. If you don't have instrumental capacity to analyze the ingredient and the content of this plastics, so you cannot say this is contaminated or mixed or what's the inside. And then we showed the illegal dumping ground in the Adana city, and this is also create an effect. And then after this reports, the government decided to ban polyethylene waste, which is comprised 70% of the total waste import. But this was very short-lived, like 7 days. After 7 days, they overturned and U-turned. They removed this ban and continued to import polyethylene waste because of the industry lobby. Now, as Jim showed in his presentation, the number of import increasing and exceed the monthly average of 2020, which is mean that all the legislation, all the regulations has no effect on the import. Let's talk about some. Could you please play the video? I can do it there. Yeah. This is the one of the canal that's used for irrigation for farmers, full of microplastics because of connected with recycling facilities and illegally dumped household plastics, mostly packaging, belongs to UK and Netherlands and Germany. This is continuously dumping grounds. Even you can see, if you visit now, you can see those plastic. You will see this plastic waste there, and you see the other side of the road, someone dumping, and the one coming and burning all these plastics and trying to get rid of all this plastic waste on the ground in open air, residential area, agricultural area. So you can imagine how this toxic chemicals, microplastics involves the food chain. And this is also in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of forest, and someone dumping plastic waste and municipality removing, and then they are dumping again, and then municipality removing. Is like a infinitive circle. So it's happening all the time. And this is the microplastic issue, which we found on the ground. They are dumping this shredded plastics, as I told you. Yeah, this is, you can understand this is specifically shredded. This is not natural degradation. This is, yeah. And also you can see here and here. You can see these are the naturally degraded plastics. You can see the shapes, and yeah, you can see the shapes here. The naturally degraded plastics, not mechanically shredded, looks completely different. And the wastewater treatment plant has microplastic pollution, microplastic problem because of these recycling facilities. So this is one of the largest wastewater treatment plants, serves treatment service for 1.5 million people, but it doesn't work because of microplastics coming from those facilities importing plastic waste. Could you please? Plastics, microplastic here, actually, there could be a couple of other hills around, but they transported all this microplastic to the official landfill area. They removed these plastics, microplastics, input part of the wastewater treatment plant. So just imagine all this wastewater treatment plant are not designed for treat microplastic.
Sorry, 1 minute.
So, and facility fires, we have facility fires, just 13 different recycling facility fires happened in just 25 days of this June. So in the last year, there was 165 different facility fires all around the country. Most of them are importing plastic waste. The Turkish coast is one of the most polluted coast, entire Mediterranean Sea. You see there is a color, red, but in the Turkish coast, red is not enough, so they jump to purple to show the amount of plastic in the coastal area. It's like 31 kilogram per kilometer per day you can collect plastics in the Turkish coast. So you can also easily find this imported plastic waste. Okay, yeah, this is the general picture of how plastic waste import affect the waste management infrastructure of Turkey? Because Turkey generates, this is rough estimation, like it belongs to 2021, almost 4 million tons generally generated domestic plastic waste, and then you can add 682,000 tons, and it means 4.5 million tons, and then we can only handle like 10% of this. It's a big issue for waste management infrastructure, because this makes the Turkish coast and the environment, even in the rivers, lakes, and mountain, even maybe in air, that we are not seeing in that publication, but generates big problem for human health and environmental health. And I would like to thank to all the participants and want to transfer to the.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So from data presentation and seeing the evidence on the ground, we'll now be moving to the governance concerns in the case of Southeast Asia. So Break Free for Plastic movement, together with Community Legal Helps and Public Interest Center, we're drafting a report on the state of play of plastic waste trade. And very alarmingly, we found this chart from the summary of import regulations of plastic waste in Asian countries. So this was attended by government officials from Asian countries, and this was presented during the workshop late last year. So we've got just very briefly on Indonesia's case. The focal point for Indonesia, the lead focal point, is the Ministry of Trade in cooperation with the Ministry of Environment and Forestry and the Ministry of Industry. So here we can see briefly the overview of the import regulations and the conditionality on the HS code for Indonesia. And we noticed that their departure from Basel is that the Ministry of Trade is actually not listed in the Basel website as a competent authority, nor it is equipped to do this job. And the rules for the import facility is still based on import facility and not shipment by shipment. The peak procedures are unused. It is not also clearly stated in the regulations. The HS codes are still there. They still define HS code for plastic waste and not the Basel plastic listings. And also there's no conditionality for exporting countries. And then for Malaysia, the main focal point is the National Solid Waste Management Department in cooperation with the Department of Environment. However, for Malaysia, same case with Indonesia, the National Solid Waste Management Department is not listed as a competent authority in the Basel website. The PIC procedure is also unused, and the Department of Environment can only not be involved after the shipment has already arrived. A good example would be the Philippines, since their lead focal point is the Environmental Management Bureau of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. However, just like the past three countries, the on PIC is also not very clear, as well as the import facility permits as still the basis for import regulations. For Thailand, the main focal point is the Department of Industry Works in cooperation with Pollution Control Department and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, or PCP. So these are the following conditions for Thailand and the overview of import regulations. We also noticed that the Department of Industry is also not listed as a competent authority, nor it is in the Basel website. And even if they're in cooperation with the Ministry of Environment, the PIC still needs to be, the lead for PIC procedure still needs to be a competent authority. And the rules for import are consistent with Y48, but still not clear on the exporting countries' conditions. Another good example also is Vietnam, where their focal points as it is the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. However, as you can notice here, again, what they use for the types of plastic scrap definitions is still the HS codes and not the Basel listings on the Y48, for instance. Okay, and then here are the requirements on plastic scraps that are not allowed to import: washed, not dirty, crushed, and shredded for Vietnam. And on the departure from Basel, just like the previous countries, it's also not clear how the PIC procedure is working, but they also have good indications on the new Basel rules that are being taken seriously. And just like all the past countries, the HS codes do not relate to Basel listings, so they should not be referred to in this way. So for the summary of concerns, like Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, their ministry or agency is without the usual competence, and it's not even in the Basel website that's listed as competent authority. The import controls are still based on receiving facilities primarily and not the shipment by shipment as per the Basel Convention. Also on the PIC procedure, there's still lack of transparency. We also checked the regulations in terms of notifications and consents. Still, it's also not, even if there is, it's not publicly available, the regulations. Also, that's why it's always not so functional. And regarding the conditionalities, there's also little ability therefore to properly limit imports on disqualifiers. Disqualifiers like non-parties of Basel Convention like the USA and the new rules of the EU exporters that have banned plastic waste exports. And lastly, on basing the definitions of HS codes, it's still on HS codes, and we know that, of course, HS codes is used for import tax or tariffs, but the countries are still not using the Basel listing, so we're more 48 on these categorization. So over to Jim for our next speaker.
Thank you, Colleen. Next, I want to introduce our distinguished government representative, Mr. Norsham bin Abdul Hamid, the Principal Assistant Director of the Hazardous Waste Division of the Department of Environment of Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jim. So I will speak on the perspective of my Department of Environment Malaysia in combating this issue on the plastic and hazardous substances trafficking. So what is our experience in controlling this issue? So I'm coming from this Department of Environment Malaysia, Putrajaya. So this is our vision and mission, and our tagline is environmental conservation, our shared responsibility, meaning that not totally is our Department of Environment responsibility, is our shared to our public and our industries and so on. Okay, so we in Malaysia, we have an international obligation. So why we, and my colleague came here because of the Basel Convention obligation, and also we also have the obligation on Stockholm Convention, Rotterdam Convention, and Minamata Convention. So emerging policy, as mentioned by the speakers, is about the transboundary movement of the plastic waste and also hazardous waste. So in Malaysia, we have that policy clearly. Okay, so policy transboundary of movement of skilled waste and hazardous waste in Malaysia stated here that whether Malaysia as an export state, we does not have, why we export the material if one condition. In Malaysia, we don't have the technical capacity and necessary facilities. So we have to manage the waste by exporting it to the other countries, okay, by using the Basel Convention. So we can export. Malaysia also can become an import state, whereby the waste are required as a raw material for recycling or recovery industry in Malaysia. So if the industries want to import, for example, the plastic, because the plastic is a raw material for them, so we, as an authority, can give the approval for the industry to import. The next point is the export state shall not allow transboundary movement to commence until it has received written consent, meaning to say that it's under approval by PIC procedure. And the TBM is in accordance with the other criteria decided by Malaysian law. And policy provided this do not differ from the objective of the convention. And also the add-on of this policy is the importation of the scheduled waste or hazardous waste or plastic waste to Malaysia is not the purpose is not for the disposal or final disposal. Okay, they have to use it for the raw material only. Then the second point is between parties and non-parties, except with bilateral or multilateral agreement For example, Malaysia and US, we have the multilateral agreement. That means the waste from US can be enter Malaysia because of that bilateral agreement. The third point is countries listed in Annex 7 to the Convention party and other states which are member of the OECD, is EU, and is prohibited to export to all the countries, including Malaysia. So we cannot receive the waste from this OECD country. Okay. Starting from 1st January 2021, Basel Convention Plastic Amendment also involved Malaysia. So in Malaysia, we allowed for importation for the Y48, okay, subject for the PIC procedure. And also B3011, also allowed for importation, but it's not subject to PIC procedure. And A3210 is prohibited for importation to Malaysia because it's mixed with the hazardous material. So how the roles and responsibility enforcement agency in tackling illegal waste in Malaysia? Okay, so for the plastic waste control in Malaysia, we have three main departments that we are collaborating each other. So the first department is National Solid Waste Management Department. So what is the function of this department is first, they have to issue the permit applicable on the importation of HS3915. Okay, this is a custom code. Then they will give a written approval to the exporter and type of plastic waste they can import or export. The third one is they have the quota limit for the importer in Malaysia. So for example, the AP says you have to import to Malaysia only 200 metric ton per year. So the quota mean you cannot exceed the numbers, right? And the fourth one is they have to do the inspection and audit when the containers landed to our port. The second important department related to this plastic waste control is Royal Malaysia Custom Department, means custom. So this custom normally they are the border enforcement. So they are the officer in controlling our entry point, whether in the port or the airport. Okay. Then normally they also doing the inspection to the containers, documentation, and the port system. So they have their own system to control the permit. So whether they want to release or block the containers, it depends on this department. Okay, for example, if they cannot they block the containers, they will inform to National Solid Waste Department to do the inspection or send the information to Department of Environment to recheck the procedure, whether these containers have the PIC procedure. The third department, as I mentioned, is my department, Department of Environment. So we are dealing with the procedure of PIC procedure because, as I mentioned, 1st Jan 2021, the PIC procedure come into force. So the Department of Environment is the department who issue the PIC procedure to the exporter or importer. So at the same time, we are doing also the evaluation of environmental impact assessment to the premise who want to build up the facilities. If the facilities is not cannot be approved, we can't approve the EIA report. And also Department of Environment also we have an annual inspection on the compliance of this wastewater treatment and emission control system to the factory related to the plastic waste recycling activity. So based on our record, okay, there is a legal movement of hazardous waste container came to Malaysia. And this record is starting from, I have the record from 2019 until 2023. Based on that data, you can see the numbers is decreasing since we apply the PIC procedure. Okay, so in year 2019, we detained 283 containers. Okay, but lately until 2023, the number is decreasing. Now only we detain 47 containers related to this illegal movement. Okay, so based on that, number of illegal hazardous containers normally, as you see, the first runner-up is United States. Okay, which normally we receive the container from United States. Every year the number is increasing. Okay, so the second one is from Romania, and also there is several countries including Australia, China, and extra, right? So what we're doing after we detain the containers, the procedure that we're doing is we return back the return shipment of the illegal plastic waste to the origin country. Okay, so in the year 2019 to 2022, we have sent up more than, for example, in 2019, we sent 124 to the origin country, and the number is for 2022, the number is decreased. We only send another 17 containers sent back to the origin country, and as you see, US still the big contribution to our country in terms of illegal plastic waste. Okay. So, what is the modus operandi of illegal trafficking? So, as an enforcement department, we determine that the first issue is illegal trade. Then the second one is false documentation and false declaration, and also the mixed plastic waste with hazardous waste. And the last one is border control. They use another uncategorized port entry to enter to send the container to our country. So in conclusion, this is how the enforcement doing. So containers with hazardous waste normally will go to our department, and plastic waste will go to National Solid Waste Department. So these two departments is really the main department who handling this plastics and also the hazardous waste trafficking issues. Okay, way forward to this, normally we have the discussion every year. So we want to enhance the technical capacity, okay, of the enforcement officer, to create more competent officer, especially in the field of waste identification, analysis, and environmental crime investigation and enforcement. The second one, to strengthen the link network communication between the enforcement, and the last one is efficient and effective exchange of information among the exporting and importing country. So that's from me. Thank you very much. So I want to send to Mr. Jim. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Norisham. Next, we're going to delve into an issue of implementation. I mean, we've been talking about implementation. Now we're going to look at things that Basel is not doing, that we forgot perhaps to do when we created the amendments, things that we're leaving out. So I'll turn it over to our scientists on the panel, Lee Bell from IPIN.
Thank you very much, Jim, and good evening, everybody. I'd like to talk about the plastic waste loopholes that are currently left in Basel, which often come down to misclassification and misinterpretation of HS codes and some of the annex codes as well. And I want to talk about loophole 1, the forgotten plastic wastes. IPIN produced this report in March 2023, looking at the plastic waste trade and the hidden numbers in relation to a number of different types of plastic waste. Primarily we were concerned about HS code, that is a tracking code for harmonized commodity systems, 3915, and that overlooks a lot of key plastic wastes. All cited statistics for plastic waste exports are derived from this HS code, and they mainly fall under the title of waste pairings and scrap plastics. But HS 3915 does not include many plastic wastes found in other HS codes. For example, the types of waste may be rubber waste, textile waste, paper waste bales, refuse-derived fuel, processed engineered fuel, and so on. When these other hidden and forgotten plastic wastes are counted, statistically recorded exports to non-OECD countries from OECD countries could be more than double the reported amounts. And I'll explain why in a moment. So while the plastic waste was, while plastic waste as such was never defined under the convention during the plastic waste amendment discussions, at the same time there was no discussion of exemptions, and that meant that all plastic waste essentially were meant to be covered by either B3011, A3210 or Y48. B3011 being non-hazardous plastic waste, which is uncontrolled, A3210, which is hazardous plastic waste, including halogenated and POPs impacted waste, which is controlled as hazardous waste for transboundary movement purposes. And Y48 was intended to cover everything else, that being mixed, uncontrolled, halogenated wastes or non-Annex 4 R3 destinations. I know that the codes can be a bit confusing, but this is waste basically that may be destined for some sort of recycling operations, but still needs controlling as a waste for special consideration and should be subject to prior informed consent controls. So just as Custom Code 3915 does not include many plastic wastes, the Basel Convention likewise forgot to include or control significant categories of plastic waste, despite the fact that they possess the same constituents and properties, including hazardous properties of Y48 or A3210. These forgotten plastic wastes are inappropriately missing from Basel controls due to either not being listed anywhere in the Basel annexes, such as RDF, or being considered by some as non-waste. Again, refuse-derived fuel is considered by some to be a product and not a waste, and therefore not controlled by Basel, or being separately listed under non-hazardous Annex 9 listings, such as plastic that gets included in paper bales sent to pulp mills, or the plastics in textiles, or classifications under rubber. And when we had a look at the statistics, the textile wastes had a very high polymer content, and we noticed that if you looked at other HS codes that related to textile wastes being exported, that in making a couple of different assumptions about the content of plastic in them, we saw that the EU, the USA and the United Kingdom, Japan had very significant amounts of plastic included within that category. If we looked at mixed paper cardboard bales, which have between perhaps 5–30% contamination with plastic, exports of those plastic wastes as a contamination load within the mixed paper bales to non-OECD countries were very significant indeed, and exceeded probably around a million tonnes per year. Refuse-derived fuel, some countries categorise it as HS 38251, a municipal waste, or should it be classified as Y48 for special consideration? Other countries I've heard are classifying it as Y46, a household waste. There's confusion and it's easy for exporters to mislead countries in terms of what refuse-derived fuel actually is. And for those who don't know, it's mostly a mixture of plastic, textiles, paper, cardboard, combustible materials taken from household waste and industrial waste, and then either turned into pellets or bales and burned in cement kilns or waste incinerators. And you can see there that the levels in between 2022 and 2023 jumping dramatically in terms of imports into Sweden, Germany and Norway, with some drops from the Netherlands and Denmark, but still significant amounts traded. Outside of the European context, the amount of RDF being traded is less clear because of the confusion over HS codes, but it is significant as far as we understand, and Australia is also a significant, or was a significant exporter of RDF to Southeast Asia. The summary of problems identified with respect to the hidden plastics is that likely half of the global plastic waste problem is not being adequately controlled despite the Basel decision in 2019 with the amendments. The current systems miss as much as 1.8 million tonnes of just two types of hidden plastic waste, that being contamination of paper bales and textile wastes. In 2019, the decision is silent on how to deal with Annex 9 listings, which also qualify as Y48 or A3210. Some countries, such as the EU, have already decided they're not going to control those types of waste using those codes. And we have no evidence to date that these hidden or forgotten plastics have been controlled by a Basel party, with the exception of Australia and their recently changed position on RDF, where they are now considering it a Y48 substance that needs to be controlled with a PIC procedure, and you must have a hazardous waste export permit to export refuse-derived fuel. So likely half of the global plastic waste problem's not being controlled, and I believe we just ran through that one. And loophole 2 is the hazardous additives forgotten by Basel. Another report by IPEN looked into the hundreds of toxic chemicals present in recycled plastic pellets. These are chemical additives that are necessary to, in modern commercial terms, to add to basic polymers to give them desirable characteristics such as flexibility, UV resistance, flame retardant, and characteristics, and so on. And they're being carried through the recycling chain. So plastic additives increase human exposure to thousands of effectively hazardous unregulated chemicals. The most recent study found that it was over 16,000 plastic additives, 4,200 were persistent, bioaccumulative, mobile or toxic. Hazard information is lacking for over 10,000 additives, and unregulated plastic chemicals of concern exceed 3,600 additives. So basically we're looking at a situation where less than 6% of all chemical additives are subject to global regulation. It's a huge market. It's currently around the $60 billion market in terms of additives, projected to rise to $90 billion in US terms by 2033. And I mentioned they have different functions: flexibility, preventing ignition, such as flame retardants, stabilizers to prevent degradation, pigments and biocides, such as arsenic and triclosan to stop microbial action. But there's a large range of these additives across plastics, and in the past, many of them have been POPs. Many chemical additives will become future POPs, in our view. They have serious hazards and health impacts. If you're looking at the hazard characteristics under Basel, you have poisonous and acute effects, toxic, delayed or chronic, and ecotoxic. We've got endocrine disruptors, heavy metals, dioxins, triclosan and zinc compounds, etc. And more importantly, the characteristic of H13, which is being able to yield another material after disposal that have Annex 3 characteristics. And this includes the disposal of plastics in ways such as open burning or dumping that result in contamination of the soil and the surrounding land, which moves into the food chain and can affect eggs, milk products, all of those sorts of things. So we have to be aware of the fact that many plastics are capable of developing other hazardous characteristics after their disposal. The illegal traffic is a significant factor. Few parties ever consider hazardous additives when classifying plastics as B3011 or Y48. Yet, as many of the additives contain Annex 1 materials that will exhibit Annex 3 hazards, and they'll qualify the waste as effectively hazardous waste, which is A3210. Further, as most shipments of plastic waste are mixed, unknown types, brands and production sources, it's impossible to know if and which hazardous additives are present. And many people don't have the analytical capacity or resources to test on a container by container basis. But the Convention does not have an ignorance is bliss policy. Rather, Basel presumes anything on Annex 1 is hazardous unless you can show it has no hazardous characteristics. So with mixed loads, the only way to rebut the presumption of hazardousness is, as I said, through expensive, cost-prohibitive testing, and it's not happening. Thus, most exports are moving as Y48 or A3210 illegal trade. And just a small diagram here to give you an example of the way that hazardous additives move around the world. This is a study by Tong et al. 2022, which looked at polybrominated diphenyl ethers and illustrating the flows of this nasty chemical POP group through the flows of both trade in terms of embodied emissions and in products and wastes. So you're seeing a mass movement of these hazardous additives from the global north to the global south with significant impacts on Southeast Asia and China, increasingly on Africa and parts of Eastern Europe and Latin America. So it's imperative that we do consider the hazardous characteristics of plastic waste in these hidden and forgotten groups of plastic that fall under other codes, both within Basel and within the commodity trade system. These are loopholes that need to be closed, otherwise we'll be continuing not only to export plastic waste that becomes marine litter and problematic litter on land, but we will also be contributing to the contamination of the food chain through the movement of POPs and other hazardous chemicals. Thank you. Jim?
Thank you, Lee. So most of the reason, the pretense for the movements across the globe of plastic waste, it's all about recycling. Very few people are saying we're going to dump it. It's really important as we examine this whole issue of plastic waste trade to see if that pretense, if that destination is truly consistent with what the convention requires. The legal requirements about ESM, or environmentally sound management, are all through the general obligations of the convention. It's a very important concept. Just looking at the last one here, ensure that imports do not take place except in ESM facilities. This is an obligation of all the parties. But we really wonder if recycling of plastics is ESM. The more we look at it, this is material that is not inherently circular. We wish it were. We wish it were like glass or copper. But the more you look closely at these facilities, the more questions you have with no answers. Plastic recycling is partial. It's never completely recycling. So when you tell countries that you're going to do some recycling, they're not talking about what can't be recycled. A lot of residual material is dumped and burned. Plastics recycling requires using and contaminating freshwater resources. Many countries don't have much freshwater resources. The US-Mexican border, we're sending a lot of this material to Mexico. They don't have the water to wash all this plastic. Plastics recycling emits volatile organic compounds to the workers in particular, but to the communities as well, and other emissions. Plastics recycling is downcycling, requiring always that you add virgin plastic to each load that's produced. They do this in the compounding process of making the pellets. Toxic additives are released, as Lee just mentioned, to put into new products. So you're just perpetuating the toxic legacy. And finally, microplastics released in all phases of recycling. We go in depth in all of these, but I'm going to choose two of them to talk about today. Plastics recycling being partial and the microplastics. So partial recycling. Plastic waste is most often traded mixed and dirty, and not all of it is economic to separate, let alone recycle it. If something is not economic to recycle, it will not ordinarily be recycled. So everything is theoretically recyclable, but the economics forbids it. So when you go to a country like Malaysia, and they're taking in plastics from the electronic waste industry in the United States, for example, they can only take a few of the polymers that are economic, and they have to find a place to dump the rest. The percentage of mixed plastic waste actually recycled is surprisingly low. The literature says 65 to 85% is recycled, but anecdotal sources, including my colleague Sadat here, says it's less than 50%. He's looked at the microplastics as the residues in particular that are massive. What to do with the residual material is a serious challenge. Typically, it will be burned on site, often at night, burned or dumped informally off-site, often at no cost to the operator. It's an externalized cost that you pay for with your health. It's that discount, that externalized cost that you don't have to pay, that is an incentive to move this stuff across the globe to a place where they're not going to present you with the bill for what it costs to mitigate all those residuals. The question is it ESM to allow any significant percentage to be dumped and burned, in particular in informal sites? Or is this very common practice actually illegal under Basel today? This is what some of the partial recycling looks like from Malaysia. The definition of the non-hazardous plastics states plastic waste listed below, provided it is destined for recycling in an environmentally sound manner. Exported B3011 then cannot have significant portions, say greater than 5%, of residues that are not being recycled in any way. And yet recycling of these plastics routinely involves downstream disposal of residuals. We just say it's going for recycling. We don't say it's going for recycling and for dumping, but it is. Also, as noted, Basel requires that all controlled waste be managed in an environmentally sound manner, all of them, Y48, etc. Again, ESM, while the recycling facility may look really clean on the inside if you get a tour, the downstream management of the residues involves the open burning I'm talking about, the open dumping, very common. This is not ESM. Export that involves these violations with the controlled Basel plastics are in fact illegal traffic according to Article 9 of the Convention, which states anything that results in deliberate disposal of hazardous or other wastes in contravention of the Convention is illegal traffic, and it's a criminal offense. It happens every day. Every time we say we're sending something to Turkey or Malaysia for recycling, it's very partial. Massive amounts of it are dumped and burned, and that is actually legal under the Convention. So looking at the issue of microplastics, I'm looking at this Guardian article of a year ago. It says recycling can release huge quantities of microplastics. And in fact, the authors of several stories after this are equating recycling of plastics to microplastics factories because they accelerate the amount of microplastics that come out of this material by the chopping, the washing, etc. Micro and nanoplastics released are in all phases of plastic recycling to workers, communities, and the environment. They are released in the facility, into the air, into the wash waters and float sink tank waters. The releases are almost all uncontrolled. So very few people are filtering this material or containing it in any way. An international team of scientists studied a UK plastics recycler and found that the microplastics released amounted to 13% of the plastics processed. So that tells me that's a low figure compared to the facilities in Turkey. The facility that I'm speaking about was releasing up to 75 billion particles in each cubic meter of water released. Now, when you recycle something, you say, okay, this works because we're making money. But what if they had to pay for the impacts of those residuals, those microplastics, pay for the costs of what they're doing to public health? Likewise with partial recycling. It would not make any economic sense if you really paid the true cost of the activity. Microplastics are implicated in emerging studies. Every time you turn around, there's a new study, if you're keeping your eye on the ball, as causing health impacts, serious ones, including cognitive decline, diabetes, heart disease, etc. These have serious economic consequences as well as just consequences. Micro nanoplastics releases during plastics recycling are Basel violations. While the most serious pollutant today, microplastics were unknown at the time of the convention drafting. Fortunately, though, the convention's current annexes 1, 2, and 3 still serve to ensure microplastics fall within the scope of the convention. First, we have many constituents of waste streams in Annex 1 found in plastic waste. Second, we have the Annex 3 characteristic, which reads, capable by any means after disposal or after recycling of yielding another material which possesses any of the other hazardous characteristics And those other characteristics are listed H11, H12, toxic and ecotoxic, which clearly describe the effect of microplastics. So they are covered under the convention. Thus, microplastics or plastics that produce microplastics are most probably a hazardous plastic waste. And if not, they will be considered Y48, all subject to control. The release of significant amounts of hazardous or Y48 microplastics directly into the environment without treatment or recycling is not ESM and is thus illegal. But again, it's very common currently. So transboundary movement involving such releases of hazardous or other waste micro and nanoplastics is illegal traffic, a criminal act under the convention. So with that, I would like to turn to some conclusions and recommendations. To put some positivity on this, we have our work cut out for us. Looking again at the promise of the plastics amendments I mentioned earlier, we were hoping the amount that's flying across the world would be reduced. We were looking that all the plastic waste would be covered. Lee showed you that many are not covered. We were hoping that the Basel parties would diligently enforce the new rules. We're finding that in places like in Southeast Asia and other countries, we are not seeing evidence of diligent enforcement, and certainly not from the exporting countries. And then finally, that the export of plastic waste would be confined to ESM operations. I've made the case here that that is not happening. So the promise is not being fulfilled. And our conclusions and recommendations are that the trade data leads us to strongly believe that the new amendments are not being fully or properly implemented. Parties must redouble their enforcement and implementation efforts. And the anecdotal information of plastic waste importing countries indicate indiscriminate dumping and burning of unrecyclable residual material and microplastics releases is the norm. This is not ESM as required under the convention. So exports and imports to such operations must cease until it is certain that such releases are halted. Competent authorities are obliged to not consent to such trade. Many parties, including importing states, are failing to properly implement the PIC procedure for plastic waste imports. They're using HS codes instead of the Basel codes. Oftentimes, the import authority is passed to agencies that are not Basel competent authorities. So model legislation, guidance, and training on implementation of the amendments should be prepared by the Secretariat. We must ensure that all plastic waste is covered by the 3 listings of the Basel Convention. We got to close those loopholes that are allowing as much as half of the current generation of plastic waste to go unregulated by the Basel Convention. This includes rubber products, plastic mixed in paper bales, refuse-derived fuel from plastics, etc. The annexes need to be amended to close those loopholes. Despite knowledge that plastic waste always contains additives, many being hazardous, we continue to ignore this fact. Plastics exhibiting hazardous characteristics must be considered hazardous waste. When additive content is unknown, these also must be considered hazardous waste. And finally, in sum, we can be very proud of what we achieved in 2019 on paper and those plastic amendments, but in actuality, we have not fulfilled the promise that we hoped for. We have a lot of work to do to properly implement the new rules, to close loopholes, allowing some plastics to fall outside of trade controls, and to ensure that plastics recycling facilities do not operate unless in an environmentally sound manner. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Colleen for the Q&A period. Hopefully we've got some questions online as well that we can look at, and I thank you very, very much.
Okay, without further ado, we're opening the floor for questions, clarifications. Please state your name and your affiliation and then state your question. Anyone? Okay, maybe they're still thinking for questions, but we have one online. Maybe for Dr. Sadat. It is said that microplastic entering oceans cannot be degraded by marine microbes, according to a researcher. So then how can it be eliminated?
Yeah, there is no silver bullet to solve this problem, but the first thing we should consider reduction of production plastic, because this is This feeds the microplastic pollution in the environment. After that, we can consider other downstream solution like collection or degradation by some other environmental factors.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Corinne Tromsdorf with the French Solid Waste Partnership. Just a question. Since recycling is never a full recycling, there's always a final disposal. How easy would it be to say that ESM actually means that the country receiving the exported plastic has to have a sound final disposal in place in addition to a recycling facility? And that would almost automatically prevent most of what we've seen today. I mean, those catastrophic examples that you've presented to us today. So my question is, how easy would it be? It seems to me that it would be a very easy thing to check. So.
Yes, so I was basing my strong statements on what we're finding. So what we're finding is the disposal of the unrecycled residues is open burning, open releases, no containment, no ESM. Final disposal can also be ESM under the convention, but that's not the practice. So you can have residuals that are not being recyclable. They have to be finally disposed in engineered landfills, for example, which has their own issues, of course, but that would be legal under the convention.
But that's my whole point. I think right now what's happening is that this waste is moving from countries who have better facilities to handle waste towards countries that have lower level of enforcement maybe, but also of practices, I guess. And most of these countries do not handle a lot of their general wastes with a sound final disposal system. So if the sound final disposal system is not in place for 100% of the waste of that country, we should not be allowed to receive any exported plastics.
You're absolutely correct. But that's not what's happening, unfortunately.
But it might be a way. It might be a way.
Yeah, but bear in mind the reason the waste moves is to avoid those kind of costs of engineered landfills, etc. It's moving for a reason. Waste just doesn't pick up and walk by itself. It's going to avoid costs, and that's the sad story. Is we're allowing the externalization of costs. That is not a circular economy. The original architects of a circular economy said that there should be no leakage, no cost externalities. There's nothing more linear than just dumping your waste or saving money by doing so. So this is not the circular economy that we talk about when we talk about plastics recycling. This is the opposite.
Hi, I'm Hige Passini, UN Trade and Environment. Thanks for your presentations, Jim. I especially liked the curve. It's going to touch my mind. Question: since we are about to head to South Korea for Busan, our last chance to plug the holes of the many holes that this market has. Waste dumping is one of the explanations, right? Okay, avoiding costs in the origin, but there are also buyers, and there are also willing buyers at the destination, importing materials, recycling part of it, dumping part of it, for sure. But as long as there is buyers, there's means that they're behind them. There's a market. So the price of recycled PT, HDP, LDP, it's often higher than the virgin polymers. So what can we bring from this discussion to the INC? Do we mean that having mandatory recycled content in products is a dangerous thing? Is it the real cause behind this market, behind this endless trade of plastic waste? I'm trying to get some lessons for us to have towards the INC agreement. Thank you.
It's a complicated equation that you're trying to solve here. Remember what I said, that the reason the market exists for some of these is because you're not paying the true cost. You're allowing things to be dumped, which costs money. Microplastics are costing people's lives. So if we really calculated the true cost of the life cycle of plastics, we might find that there should be no market. And that's what legislation like the Basel Convention is meant to do. It's meant to internalize costs by putting rules up. And the rules say you can't use non-ESM, for example. You have to do something that's more expensive. But that's not what's happening. And I'm really unhappy that we're characterizing this as part of a circular economy. It's not. On the issue of post-consumer plastic and trying to promote recycling in that way, I'm very skeptical. I'd like to pass it over to Lee, but remember, we're putting these toxic additives into the new recyclate, and we haven't solved that problem yet. Until you can tell me that we're not going to take these plastics with toxic additives and turn them into children's toys and drinking cups and things, which are going to, again, harm people, why do we want to use post-consumer recycled plastic? It isn't just plastic, it's toxic waste. And I'll let Lee comment, because I've been done a lot of work on this.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just to add to what Jim had to say, there is a risk that arguing for recycled content in plastic products will drive a market like this. If exports of various plastic wastes are allowed to go to countries for so-called ESM recycling, you may see a situation where that's seen as some sort of panacea towards recycled content levels. Corporations can give themselves a green tick for the recycled content in their product. And this doesn't just apply to the conventional recycling that we're familiar with, the mechanical form of recycling. And there's been a lot of hype around chemical recycling as well, and also a lot of if you like, creative accounting systems around recycled content and chemical recycling and how that might be applied. And the real risk there is that we could see chemical recycling facilities set up in developing countries that don't have sound management and enforcement and regulation of the facilities themselves, or the hazardous waste residues that leave those facilities, and that we might end up actually stoking the international plastic waste trade again to the global south as a result of wanting to have recycled content in our plastic cups in the north. So there's a dynamic at play here where promotion of recycled content in the name of circularity may be doing more damage than good. And we're really concerned about the dynamics of that, whether it be conventional recycling, where, as Jim mentioned, IPEN has done many studies showing that hazardous chemical additives, which are a real problem, are just moving through the recycling chain. And so while you might have brominated flame retardants that were POPs, PBDEs in electronic plastic waste casings is then transferred into children's toys, and your children are playing with hazardous waste. The consumer is unaware of that, but it might have a nice 30% recycled plastic content to it. And so you can see how the advertising promotional effect of this issue is divorced from the physical hazardous chemical realities of recycling, and it's a big problem with no solution on the horizon at this stage, except removing chemical additives that are hazardous from plastics. And at this point, there's currently no solution to that that's being offered. Thanks.
Okay, are there any more questions on this floor? If there's none, I'll move to the questions online for the last questions. Okay, so first, this question is for Jim. All the panelists, this was enlightening. The question is, what is the technicality that the US has not ratified the treaty? And then I think the other one is for Libel. Clarification of what is covered by the Basel plastic codes required by the Basel Convention to close the loopholes of plastic waste that is misclarified or has hidden plastic waste, or is it the responsibility of each country? And lastly, for Mr. Hisham, question for Malaysia, are importers with permits required to report a volume of residual waste? If not, can this be mandatory? Is microplastic discharge currently monitored under Malaysia's effluent and clean air regulation? So yeah, maybe Jim first.
The question of why the United States, the world's most wasteful country per capita, is not part of the rules of the road for waste trade is in a nutshell because their industry was very strong at lobbying against it for many, many years and many, many administrations. The most powerful scrap lobby is the formerly known as ISRI, now known as REMA. They have always opposed Basel ratification. They're very strong in our Congress in their influence. If they change their mind, then we have a good chance that that could change. But it's not just the REMA group, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, etc., opposed it in early days, and now almost nobody knows what it is. So it's not top of the agenda anymore. But we are behind the scenes trying to find a way to break that impasse.
Thank you, Jim. Very quickly, Liebe. Yes.
Yes, if I could just address the question around whether these hidden waste, whether it be in textiles, paper bales, refuse-derived fuel, is that an issue for classification and clarification in terms of the coding by the Basel Convention, or should it just be left up to individual countries to decide? For me, it's the former. We need to see the Basel Convention clarify how we are going to code these particular types of hidden waste. And to our view, it must at least be Y48. They should be waste for special consideration if they contain significant quantities of plastic waste. If not, classify it as A3210, that being hazardous plastic waste on the basis of the chemical additives that they contain and the hazardous characteristics that may result from that. Something like refuse-derived fuel might not always be considered hazardous waste if it's using some very benign or less benign, more benign forms of plastic waste, not computer casing shredded up, but plastic milk containers or something like that. But the reality is it should be at least classified as Y48 to ensure prior informed consent procedures are available for the countries of import and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir Hisham?
Okay, for Malaysia, currently we don't have didn't ask the company to report the volume of the residue. And for the microplastic in effluent, we didn't monitor it, but we monitored the suspended solid. And for the emission, under clean regulation, we didn't monitor the microplastic, but we monitored the particulate matter 10, PM10, in the discharge of the chimney. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, and that ends our side event for today. Thank you so much, everyone, and especially to those who are tuning online. And thank you, Geneva Environment Network, for the support. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you.
Can I just announce some upcoming events starting by tomorrow? So we wait for you all in room B at lunchtime, where we are discussing the status, potentials and risks of chemicals recycling of waste plastics. It's in room B at lunchtime and online for who is still online with us. And then we have a few other events coming up on the Thursday where we are also going to discuss plastics, the book that was launched by some of our panelists a few months ago. And that is in the evening, and at lunchtime we are discussing shipbreaking issues. And then finally on Friday, we are discussing pharmaceutical waste with our friends of UNEP Jeff team. So hope to see you at some of these events. Thank you.